From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Dylan the Tennessee Pal Fagan. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. This is the second part of a two-part interview with the creator of Absolute, the journalist, documentarian, filmmaker, author, podcaster, Nick Berardini. We're midway through the show in media res, so why don't we just pick up where we left off?
Let's do it.
I know we kind of hit this already, Nick, but I want to drill down more into those pig tests. One of the episodes is that you've made on your show is called Defective Pigs, and this episode goes into depth of what was actually being done. And well, you tell us the details, but I think they were doing tests on pigs where an elongated taser event was occurring that they were testing, right? What happened there?
The thing that really almost takes the whole company down is this sort of accidental discovery. What happens is there's a lot of controversy by the mid-2000s around tasers because they are becoming incredibly popular with cops. And as such, you start to see a lot of people being killed. So now we're talking about the New York Times is doing big investigations. You're talking about CBS News, the Arizona Republic. Robert Anglin is a terrific reporter from the Arizona Republic. A great guy who just like kicked their ass, not on purpose, not trying to be, somebody who was adversarial, but doing kind of what I was doing, which was taking these claims at face value and checking them out and being like, I don't think that adds up, bro. And then them fighting him over the fact that, right, what they're saying isn't true. You have all of this scrutiny that didn't exist in the early days. In fact, this weapon got a lot of positive media attention in the beginning because it was a great idea. The idea that you could have an electric weapon that would prevent police shootings. Everybody can get on board with that. But of course, as people start dropping dead and there are stories popping up about 6-year-olds being tasered and grandmas being tasered and like all these things start to make really controversial news, the company realizes they're going to basically be in a public opinion war, right? And they're a big target because at the same time as these deaths and injuries are starting to happen, the stock had gone from like trading at like $3 a share to like being, like I said, I think they went from a shareholder value, maybe of like 8.4 million, I think, when they went public in 2001 to like 1.9 billion by April of 2004. This is like a unicorn, right? This is pre-Facebook and all these terms we've become familiar with, with all these tech companies, right? This was after the dot-com crash. You have a tech company, essentially, a weapons manufacturer that's kind of a tech company, right, just smoking the NASDAQ. I mean, doing incredible, numbers in terms of its shareholder value.
And Rick Smith is, by the way, at this point becoming almost like a messianic figure for stockbrokers, and he's got the you've established him not just as a guy born into very good means with a lot of opportunities, but now a guy who might be drinking his own Kool-Aid or technically
1,000%,
right?
Oh, this is everything he ever dreamed of, was to be basically up like he wanted to be like Steve Jobs. I mean, that's really what he wanted to be like. And so he's got a cult of personality within law enforcement because the literal corporate, mission statement was protect truth, protect life. So all these cops are, like hailing him as this great hero of policing because he's invented this weapon that can save lives by, not having to shoot people or beat people with batons anymore, right? But then you also have this incredible retail investor rush of glorification of him where these day traders and these average people are able to beat the big banks, on a stock that the big banks think is kind of bull. And right, the day traders and the retail investors and the mom and pops doing their own trading are hailing because of the sales numbers. Quarter to quarter are just bananas at this time. But what happens, and getting back to the pig tests, is Rick now has everything at stake because he, in 2004, his family in 2004 makes $100 million in stock sales alone, right? Their whole fortunes are being made on the rocket ride up the NASDAQ in that year. At the same time, people start dying and the controversy starts to really swell about, is this weapon really what they said it was? And they start having to do these other studies to basically try to confirm and back up sort of what they had said. And at the same time, other researchers are getting interested because it's a big story. It's a controversial story. So the guys like Andrew Dennis, who I mentioned, are sitting in a taser training as a cop and going like, I'm gonna check that out myself. What they discovered in early 2005, I believe it was, sometime in early 2005, they start doing this study with the Cleveland Clinic, which is one of the most reputable, hospitals in the entire country. And this electrophysiologist named Patrick Chu is one of the best electrophysiologists in the country. They hire him to prove that cocaine or stimulant drugs don't make someone more susceptible to heart trouble when they're tasered. And the study that he does kind of proves that. But this pig study is the first to use an ultrasound or an echocardiogram to measure a heart rhythm, because previously they were doing a lot of studies. And if you use an EKG on a pig, for example, during an animal study, and you shoot it with a taser, right, the EKG is going to go away because the electric current is interfering with the reading. An echocardiogram is an image of the heart, right? And the electrocardiogram, they discover this current is overriding the pig's heartbeats in these early stages. Sometimes they bounce back to normal when the shock ends. Sometimes they speed up to rapid rates that can lead to what's called ventricular fibrillation, which is essentially what is described as a bag of squiggly worms in your heart. No real rhythm, quickly leads to death. When you see people shoveling snow, you hear about people shoveling snow and they drop dead in the snow, they have a heart attack. A lot of times that's ventricular fibrillation. It's a messed up current, an uncontrollable current inside the heart rhythm, right? Well, this is a huge deal because they never tested for what was called cardiac capture, that the current could actually override somebody's heart. They were just testing to see in the beginning, would the electric current send a dog or a pig heart immediately into ventricular fibrillation, that squiggly worm current? Well, because they never tested for capture and now they're finding capture, they're starting to cover their ass thinking like, how do we show that that actually isn't what had happened in this test done by this incredibly reputable electrophysiologist they'd hired to do the study? And that leads to all of this internal testing that a lot of it wasn't published, trying to sort of disprove what Patrick Chu ended up proving. And that study is eventually going to become the real impetus for these legal threats, because now lawyers can say, they told you for years this weapon could not affect the heart, and they have known that it can by their own study that they have paid for since 2005, and they have not warned cops anywhere. So those pig tests are basically a way to try to disprove it. And all they keep doing is just proving repeatedly what that original one that they did sort of showed, which is a shock in close enough to the heart, and especially an elongated one, especially one for longer than 5 seconds, can override a person's heartbeat. And the longer that shock went, the more likely it was to happen. Not that it's likely to happen in the beginning. I'm going to be very clear. It's not like a bunch of people died from tasers because they got shot in the chest. But the risk was obviously significant, given that the weapons at that point were being used something like 1,000 times a day by American cops.
Yeah, we also see at this point, we see a great appetite on behalf of Taser International, who has not yet changed their name, to find, I'll say it undiplomatically, to cherry pick other ideas or, frankly, pitches, not real science, that will suit their narrative. There's a conversation we had back in 2021 on a show called Behind the Bastards about the concept of excited delirium. And we know Big Taser loved this idea. Could you tell us a little bit about excited delirium, why Taser International was so on board with championing this?
You have heard of excited delirium because of Taser International. This was a syndrome that was very, very, obscure, comes all the way back. They would tie it all the way back to the 1800s in a thing called Bell's mania, which was basically like a psychosis in mental institutions going back to the 1800s. A forensic pathologist named Cyril Wecht, who's a very controversial, figure in forensic pathology, started using the phrase excited delirium or cocaine psychosis in the 1980s to try to explain people who were dying in Miami in bizarre circumstances. That was then later debunked, that it wasn't related to any sort of drug intoxication. I think, in fact, I'm speculating a little bit this because I forget it all now, but I think some of the deaths of these women that they were targeting were basically they were using sort of their sexuality against them, and that they were actually killed by a serial killer, I believe, was one of the findings. You guys, am I right about that? You guys might know better than me on this stuff.
Yeah, you are correct.
Yeah, okay.
You are correct, Nick. When I was talking with Robert, he was able to confirm that on that show. It's kind of bullshit, though, right? Excited.
It's a bullshit syndrome that, because people could not explain some pathology that led some people with mental illness to die, the pathology always required restraint. People weren't just dropping dead. What could happen is somebody who was really worked up, whether that was because of drugs or some sort of mental break, would be restrained. And the restraint itself was typically the trigger for how someone might die. But because there was no obvious forensic pathway to show, it was asphyxiation, right? They couldn't breathe or what. There was no obvious clear cut point to the liver and show the damage to the liver and say that's why it happened. Excited delirium kind of became this thing that was bandied about, maybe there's some sort of syndrome that's taking place in people who are not within their own sound-minded body. Taser took that and it started in the very first training version. I believe I saw this, and I may be wrong, it might have come in earlier, but I really remember it starting to be pushed into training versions around November of 2004. This is a super controversial period because, again, the stock is skyrocketing, and this is when they're also, for the first time, really being pounded by, big national media. The SEC is floating around thinking about an investigation. The Arizona Attorney General is about to start an investigation. So they are looking to show cops who are seeing these headlines and thinking about, well, how's the taser not killing these people? Why can we trust you when you say that the taser cannot kill? They point to excited delirium, which for American police is the perfect excuse, because we have such a culture of victim blaming in American policing that it basically allows the cops to say, it wasn't the taser. It wasn't my actions of the tasering someone for 1 minute and 15 seconds who was high on methamphetamine that caused this person to die. It was them being high on methamphetamine, dying of excited delirium, and just crashing out. And that they put so much energy into pushing excited delirium and all these conditions that sort of get bucketed with excited delirium as the reason for why people were dying in custody. And that deflected blame, especially with the customer, with American police, from the weapon itself, because that's really who they were answering to. The SEC investigation that happened into Taser International was whether or not they lied about the safety of the taser. Well, to prove that they lied about the safety of the taser, you would need to do some medical research to dispute their claims, which the SEC is a financial regulatory body. They weren't going to do, right? The Arizona Attorney General's office dropped their investigation because Taser agreed to essentially stop calling tasers non-lethal. They would refer to them as less lethal, and that was fine for the Arizona AG. The investigation gets dropped, right? It's cops who matter. They are the only ones who can basically kill this business if there is some skepticism. And for a period, there was. 2005 was a brutal year for Taser International because they were under SEC investigation And a lot of departments canceled orders saying, we can't do business with a company who might get hammered by the feds. We have to pause this until this gets sorted out. And Excited Delirium became a part of that push to show, no, it's not the taser. It's all these other things. And like, that guy was just a drug addict piece of shit who dropped dead, and like, they're blaming the taser now because that's what these crybabies do. Mike Brave said something, one of the most despicable things I've ever read in print, quite frankly, where he said to Mother Jones, I think, who did a big investigation at the time about Excited Delirium, he said, do we blame the druggies, the druggie or the druggie's mom who cries when someone dies? No, we blame the cop and we blame the taser because that's what's there at the time of death. And it was so prevalent a part of their rhetoric that these were people out to get you, the officer, and us, the company, trying to provide you a service. And you know what? Like, them. It's their own fault. And that worked. That worked incredibly well. It worked on Matt Masters. And that is what I feel is so devastating, is that if it had actually been taken seriously and honestly, right, there could have been a sort of reforming of the way the weapon was treated and policies were made. And there could have been an honest discussion about what the real risk was of the device without pulling them off the street, without getting cops to use them. But the difference is, if police officers then started to put in their minds there was a small risk that someone could be killed or harmed from this weapon, they would no longer be tasering 6-year-olds and grandmothers and people who didn't want to sign speeding tickets. And why, if I am the Chicago PD, if I'm the NYPD, if I'm these huge departments where they were pushing to arm every officer with a taser, why would I give every officer a taser when they already have a gun, they already have pepper spray, they already have the baton, whatever it may be? And if they're only going to be able to allow to use a taser when there's a real fight that's happening, why would I spend millions of dollars for the department to give everyone one? Just give them to, sergeants, give them to supervisory units, give them to SWAT, whatever. And that would kill the whole business model, because the business model was, this wasn't some niche weapon. The business model was, this was a panacea. This was a magic bullet that could be used for anything.
Let's pause here. We'll have a word from our sponsors, and then we'll dive deeper into the story of tasers. And we've returned.
It really sucks because, like I said at the top of this, it seems like a great idea to have this thing at the ready as a non-lethal force that can be deployed. But, it isn't used in the way that it's ever I've never seen a video of a taser being deployed by a police officer that is used in the way that is used in the tests. And if you look at those tests, every single one, including the one with Hans Marrero, which was like the big one, there is a mat laid on the ground so that a human being, when they fall down in the way a human being falls down when they're tased, it doesn't cause damage, right? When you fall down that way. But then in almost every video you see of a police officer using a taser, there is either asphalt or concrete or some hard surface that's there. And people don't talk about the traumatic brain injuries that occur when a taser is deployed because a human being falls face down onto concrete or asphalt. It just stinks because if it was used in those little bursts, I'm not trying to say tasers are safe in that way, but if it was used in those little bursts to stop someone in the moment, it seems like it would be a fairly safe weapon, weapon for most instances, but it's just not.
And it seems like it's just become a device for intimidation.
Also, also a huge profit center, but as we alluded to, not the sole income stream for Taser International at this point, and that's something we definitely have to address. Like this, the thing that Matt is bringing up here is mission critical, right? It's kind of like how during Prohibition, companies would sell grape juice concentrate, and they would have a warning label on the package that said, "Don't do the following things because this will turn that grape juice into an alcoholic beverage." And everyone was like, "Oh, gotcha, buddy." So we see again the conflict of, like, one thing I love about Absolute in general is the way that you describe it as a story about unchecked power. And it goes so much deeper than the mechanics or the science of taser technology. I see it as a battle between stories with lives on the line, right? Narratives, truth versus fiction, PR versus reality. And we see also, and this is a personal question, I don't want to put you too much on the spot here, Nick, but we see also that Big Taser, I'm calling them that, can be a little bit defensive when people find things that don't match their stories. So can you tell us a little about legal actions or reprisals that people feel they have encountered? And on the personal note, dude, have you at any point felt like someone was gunning for you as a result of this? Because you've been at this for more than a decade and a half.
Personally, I've never felt a lot of threat or danger in any way aside from the usual. You know, they were very serious when my film came out about review bombing the documentary on Amazon and IMDb and iTunes and these things, attacking me personally in the press, doing that kind of stuff you expect, right? They sort of that backfires, right? Because that just draws more attention. What I'm dealing with now is a completely different company than I was dealing with 10 years ago. And that's because they are a tech conglomerate. I mean, I've told people, and I firmly believe this to be true, that this is the most important and powerful company, at least that's publicly traded, let's say, that you don't actually know about. And the reason for that is because they have morphed from this niche taser manufacturer into the dominant provider of all law enforcement technology. And that's expanding into different public safety sectors like healthcare, public schools even, right? That's how far this is getting. They were a, billion-dollar-ish company when I was doing my film 10 years ago. They are a $50 billion company now, and that is because of the camera systems, the drones, the artificial intelligence, all these other things that they used the taser success for, and the relationships they had in policing already because of the taser. They took those relationships and leveraged them into all these other tech spaces. So to answer that question, they are now much, much too big to make the mistake of picking on me personally in some way, because they would know that would just invite more eyeballs onto what they are actually up to. And Rick Smith himself, while still deeply involved in the company, right, is not actually calling the shots in the same way he would have been 10 years ago, because this is a much more buttoned up place. That doesn't mean you don't read. Reuters has been doing an amazing job, like writing stories about the culture at Axon and the kind of weird that they still do. But this is a place that wants to be seen much more in the line of Apple than it would, 10 years ago when it was still just kind of a niche weapons manufacturer. Now, does that mean that they don't do some things that I would still find intimidating? Sure. They especially did them. I felt like we premiered at Tribeca Film Festival, when my film came out. I was certain that I was being, watched and followed during that, experience. As we got ready to launch our podcast, Rick Smith decided to launch his own podcast and his own show called Boldly Go, right, to tell the company's mythology. Matt Stroud, who helped me with this project, wrote a book that Taser was a big part of 5-6 years ago. Then Rick Smith wrote his own book called The End of Killing, sort of as a way to compete with that. He does some weird stuff like that. But mostly what's scary to me is that they are so beyond dealing with, me, that actually they're too buttoned up to do anything dumb. And that's actually what's scary, is the stuff they do now is Minority Report. And Rick Smith wrote about how Minority Report is actually a great idea. Let's kidnap 3 clairvoyant women and put them in a bathtub and make them predict murders forever. And Rick sees that movie and is like, that's some genius right there.
It's 100% like what's that old sci-fi? What's that old sci-fi meme? It's like someone walks into a boardroom and says, "Guys, remember that amazing novel, Never Build the World Ender? Well, we had read it and we think we can do it right now."
Yeah.
Right.
That joke seems to be holding true for a lot of these tech giants lately, like with the giant AI facilities and the supercomputers named after science fiction characters and like Hyperion and stuff like that. It seems like they didn't quite get the message of a lot of these dystopian novels.
When we're making comparisons here to Apple and other tech companies, let's jump to Forbes really quick, just so we can understand how big Axon Enterprises is. If you look at the CEO compensation for a company like Apple, Tim Cook, we've heard Tim Cook's name. We know who that is. We've seen him on the TV all the time. He took home $75 million last year as his compensation package. Steven Schwarzman, the CEO of the Blackstone Group that we talk about a lot on this podcast, he took home $84 million. Rick Smith last year topped Forbes' list of CEO compensation, taking home $165 million last year. He's at the top of the list. And how often do you have a conversation with your friends about Axon Enterprise?
Right. And what I guess Ben was initially asking, which I think was kind of the bigger point that I'm making, is 20 years ago, they were so eager they sued Gannett newspapers, right? Like they did what I would say is dumb PR stuff. They attacked reporters a lot. They accused Alex Berenson, who was writing for the New York Times at that point, of being in on a poker game, with hedge fund managers. And that's why he was attacking them in the press. I mean, they just did the kind of conspiratorial things that are actually not rooted in in some truth to power. Not that the media doesn't deserve our critiques every now and then. Of course we do. But the point being, like, they were so eager to mix it up and have those fights. They would sue, they would attack, they would do these things relentlessly because there was a cult of personality around what they were doing and the leadership. And now the language is terrifying, because the language is these stages and these product launches and these things you're used to with the Apples of the world, where Rick will get on stage and tell you that we are going to live in a world without any crime anymore because of the technology that he is going to provide. And don't worry, we'll use our ethics panel to weigh in when we think we might be going too far. And oh, by the way, because the ethics panel doesn't think we should put taser drones in schools, we're going to fire basically, I shouldn't say fire, 9 of the 12 board members technically resigned, right? But when the board disagrees, 9 of the 12 board members resign, and they don't really have a public-facing ethics board anymore. That's actually what's scary about this now. It is morphed into the kind of company that has resources and power that is so big and vast that they wouldn't even bother to mess with someone like me anymore, because all they could do is pick a fight with somebody who's just going to draw attention to them in a way that they don't need, they don't care about.
They could just pressure companies during some kind of acquisition phase. I don't know.
Right.
Paramount,
Possibly.
CBS, South Park.
Keep it in. Sorry, we've got a bug going around the office, Nick.
We got that episode delayed by a week. Somehow.
Okay, let's take a quick pause right here for a word from our sponsor, and then we'll jump right back into the troubling history and future of tasers. And we're back.
Folks, there is so much more we want to get to. Nick, you are being so generous with your time. We wanted to point this out, folks. We recommend visiting the Lava for Good website to check out episodes of Absolute, because, I mean, of course, available wherever you find your favorite shows. I think we're legally required to say that. But if you go to the Lava for Good website, when you check in on each episode page, you can find in-depth supporting literature and documentation that backs up everything that you are saying. And you, unlike maybe Axon's board, you were very ethical in your exploration here. And we just want to say we have such immense respect for the moments where you were very clear and you're saying, look, I can't I cannot provably, objectively say this thing. I can show you these things are true. And that's a nuance that's missing in a lot of reporting. And I hate that all four of us nodded our heads when we made that point. What do you hope that people can get out of the show once they tune into Absolute? We watch, we hear it, maybe we watch the documentary as well. We're walking away. We're talking with someone the next day. What do we know? What has changed?
Well, I think, the show is rooted in the story of Matt Masters, who is a cop who had dedicated his whole life to policing in this way of, I hate to use the cliche of warrior cop, right? But I mean, this was a SWAT guy who kicked in 1,000 doors and did the real stuff. And someone who believed in the job in a way that was admirable, I think. I think he did actually wants to do good in the world when he started. And what you hear from him, what you understand is, it is a show about tasers, but it's also a show about policing and the system of policing, the nature of how these guys are trained, what they are asked to do, is so rooted in hero worship. It's so rooted in us versus them mentality that it actually made Matt doubt his own kid, because he didn't believe for a while that his own kid wouldn't have done something to provoke an officer from tasering him. And the tragedy of this is that this company that made this taser used and leveraged that sort of mentality to build a massive, massive business, starting with the taser. And when hit the fan, when it was clear they had lied about the safety of the device for many years to these officers, very surreptitiously threw those officers under the bus. They made it so the liability for what happens when a taser does injure or kill someone is squarely on the shoulders of the cops who are using them. And the cops who are using them are still operating under a message that the weapon is perfectly safe.
It almost sounds like what happened with the Purdue Pharma and, like OxyContin being non-addictive, and then sort of throwing the doctors under the bus and the pharmacy reps and things like that.
1,000%. And what I say is, don't forget that they hired and used cops as trainers to teach this material that they wrote. So when the cops were sitting in training, they were not seeing a taser salesperson. They were seeing a police officer, someone who was a part of that brotherhood with them, right? And that betrayal of law enforcement speaks to the company's willingness to protect itself, to choose itself, right, over 1 million police officers doing this public safety job, but also speaks to the complicity of American policing in the way that they are willing to basically receive any sort of messaging that is in line with that broad thinking, which is that we are on the right side of the thin blue line. We are protecting the world from chaos, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to the degree that they were betrayed and they sort of swallowed their own betrayal. And that the irony of that is that the moment Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Taser International took their body camera product, which was struggling to sell because cops didn't want to be filmed all day, and changed the messaging and pivoted the messaging to be about transparency, to be about accountability, to appeal to a public that was now asking for their police officers to be held to some sort of proof, right, about what they were doing in their jobs. That shows you the ability of the company to find its way through the mass and figure out a way to profit off of anything. Now that same company, right, gives you the rhetoric like we're going to no longer live in a world of crime because cameras are going to be everywhere. And I will say the scariest thing to me is I don't believe in this like what did you do to get tasered stuff? But it is true that when cops were attacking Matt Masters, what he was personally trying to warn them, because he went on this journey of discovery and saw this stuff existed after the surgeon told them that the taser caused his son's cardiac arrest. He did his own research, and it wasn't hard to realize, oh, this is actually out here. This is happening across the country. And when he tried to talk to his fellow officers about the actual dangers they weren't learning about in their taser training, he was brushed aside. And his own son was basically said, well, why didn't you just do what the cop told him to do, right? I don't believe in that kind of thinking, right? I don't believe Bryce Masters deserved what he got because he refused to get out of a car when the officer told him to get out of a car, when Bryce was asking, why am I being placed under arrest? There's a whole history you'll hear about in the show about why he was wary of doing that, why he was wary of getting out of the car. But it is true that he made a choice not to comply. When you leave your apartment and you go to the corner store to buy a sandwich and get a Coke, you are not making a conscious choice to put your face on a company's database to then be analyzed and used and predicted about whether or not you are more likely to shoplift that sandwich and that coat. That is what is happening. It's not coming. It is already in effect. These are these real-time crime centers where they are placing cameras everywhere, right? Everywhere. And they are going to Axon servers, and they are being fed through artificial intelligence to figure out who is going to commit crimes and who is not. They have been very, very slow and very, very cautious about facial recognition in a public-facing way. But do we really believe that the moment the public opinion shifts just enough to say, like, maybe this technology isn't so bad, they won't be ready to capitalize and go full force on facial recognition technology, on the dash cam videos that they now push, because they have dash cam software, on the body cameras that they have, on the street light cameras that they have acquired, that they are trying to put everywhere, right? This is all about surveillance now. And you don't opt into that surveillance. There's no user agreement for you to sign. You decide to leave your house, that's your choice to opt in to being watched constantly while they profit from it.
That's your consent. God dang it.
This is horrifying.
We've got to have you back on the show. I was mesmerized. And it is true. Yeah, well, we say it so often. You know, a lot of the things that are sometimes dismissed as alarmism, especially in the world of tech and surveillance, those things are already here. They're happening, right? Companies do a lot of things poorly and they do a lot of things well, but one thing companies at this size never do is improvise and play jazz, right? If something rolls out, there has been a plan in place.
Right. And drones, I forgot drones. They want drones everywhere. And
that's what I was looking at, Nick, on their website. Yeah. The way they talk about with Fusus, they can integrate all the cameras and the drones. And we talked about, what is it, Spot Shotter or Shot Spotter?
Yeah, we got a nice letter from them.
So Mike's cameras, drones, this is great, guys. We
got a nice, just checking in from our good friends at Spot Shotter. What a world. We're not joking, or at least I'm not joking about about having you back on for a further exploration, because Noel, Matt, I know there are a bunch of things that we did not get to. We also want to shout out our producer, Dylan, who, when we were talking about sci-fi and not learning the lessons, Dylan proposed the name, we've built the Torment Nexus from the world-famous novel, Please Don't Build the Torment Nexus. Nick, where can people not just learn more about your work in general, but where can we reach out to you and your team on the subject of tasers, on the subject of expansion of technology and what this means for the future? Where can people find you?
Yes, I am still on the X Twitter, machine. So definitely follow me at Nick Berardini on Twitter or X. I am also on Instagram at Nick Berardini. But the Lava page, I definitely encourage everybody to follow and get in touch with us on the Lava page. That's Lava Podcasts at Lava for Good on Instagram, TikTok. Right, Lava. The reason I did this show with them is because they did Bone Valley. And Bone Valley, to me, is one of the best podcasts ever made about the wrongful conviction of a man named Leo Schofield in Florida. And so Lava is really pushing hard for this idea of Black Mirror, taking effect especially in this story. And that's basically, I think, hopefully where we'll end up going in season 2, is trying to explore now, okay, the success of the taser, we tease this, at the end of this current season, but the success of the taser, what does that mean for today? And definitely check Lava out, because they're going to be doing more shows in that same absolute feed that we're in, that kind of wrestle with the marriage between capitalism and technology.
What a phenomenal ride. I mean, we came in and we weren't all keeping the same notes for this one, so I know there's a bunch of stuff we weren't able to get to. But I don't know. Guys, one thing I was thinking about, why is there not more regulation regarding these devices? Like, we can just pop on Taser's website, or we can pop on Amazon, like you were saying, Noel, and there's no age restriction, there's no licensing, there's no training course. You can just buy one with a credit card.
Yeah, the whole point of the pivotal moment was when gunpowder was removed from these and allowed them to be classified in a different way to firearms, which I think opens things up. I think you buy them just the same way as you buy pepper spray. But Nick also does some really great differentiation between the consumer models that are available on, say, Amazon, and the kinds that law enforcement uses.
And with that, folks, thanks again to Nick. Thanks again to you for tuning in. Now, we've got a lot of people in law enforcement in the crowd. We've got a lot of veterans in the audience. We have a lot of people who have one way or another interacted with tasers, and perhaps unknowingly with this company, Axon. We want to hear your thoughts. You can find us on the internet. You can give us a phone call. You can always send us an email.
That's right. Find us at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook with our Facebook group. Here's where it gets crazy: on X, FKA, Twitter, and on YouTube with video content galore for your perusing enjoyment. On Instagram and TikTok, however, we are Conspiracy Stuff Show.
If you want to give us a call, our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use your name and message on the air. If you'd like to send us an email, we are
the entities that read each piece of correspondence we receive. Be well aware, yet unafraid. Sometimes the void writes back. And hey, if you are interested in further exploration of some topics we discussed in this 2-part interview segment, do check out Behind the Bastards 2021 series on the concept of excited delirium. Warning, it's not appropriate for all audiences. Anyway, we're Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.